Hello guys, welcome back to SCM Decoded. So today we are going to discuss about gap analysis in episode 12. Like it is quite evident from our past episodes that every supply chain plan produces a gap. Not because planning is broken, because the future never matches the forecast. That is not a failure, that is pure physics. The question is never whether the gap exists, the question is what type it is and who owns closing it. See, most organizations skip that question. They see the number, assign the blame, and kind of move on. The same gap appears next cycle because nothing that caused it was actually fixed. Today, three gap types: a framework for diagnosing which one you have, and the accountability discipline that separates organizations that close gaps from organizations that keep measuring them. So let me give you the definition first because the word gap is kind of used loosely in most organizations, and loose definitions produce loose accountability. A forecast gap is the difference between what demand planning predicted and what the business actually sold, produced, or delivered. Maybe in kind of units, value, and in every planning horizon. That is the definition on screen. What has changed over 3 decades is not the definition. What has changed is what organizations can do with it. Before enterprise planning systems existed, the gap was invisible inside the cycle. You found the variance at month end, finance owned the number, and operations owned the excuses. After that, ERP and MRP made it visible inside the cycle. Planners could see variance before it compounded. Most companies started measuring it. Fewer understood the type. Almost none acted on it within the planning window. Today, analytics platforms can decompose variance by root cause in real time. The discipline has totally shifted. The question is no longer how large is the gap. The question is which type and which function closes it. So, visibility without diagnosis is just a better view of the same unsolved problem. So, three types, not two, not five, but three, which I have jotted down over here. And they require completely different responses from completely different functions. The first gap is structural gap. This gap is caused by something your supply network physically cannot do: lead time ceilings, capacity constraints, supplier limits, no model improvement, no AI, no better demand signal eliminates a structural constraint. What closes it is a capital decision. The owner is general management and finance, not planning. Look at the signal row. Same SKU cluster, same geography, cycle after cycle. That persistence is the fingerprint of a structural gap. If you are seeing the same gap in the same place for 3 consecutive cycles, stop asking the planning team to fix it. Execution. The plan was achievable. Something in the execution chain broke. Late production, a logistics failure, a warehouse error. The demand forecast was correct. The execution plan, the execution chain produced a variance. This is not a planning failure, and treating it as one is both inaccurate and dangerous. And the third type, the forecast gap. The demand plan was wrong, model selection error, signal missed, assumptions failed, bias running unchecked. This is the only gap that demand planning directly owns, and the only one it closes through better method, signal, and governance. So, three types, three owners, three interventions. Treating all three as one problem guarantees you solve none of them. So, here is what happens in most organizations when A gap appears in a review meeting. Someone senior says demand planning owns it. What went wrong with the forecast? End of inquiry. So, structural gaps go unescalated because planning absorbs the blame and leadership never sees the investment case. Execution gaps go unfixed because operations are never held to account for variance they cost. But the most dangerous consequence is what it does to the planning team's behavior. When people are penalized for gaps they did not cause, they stop producing honest forecast. They start producing defensible forecast. They adjust assumptions to protect the review meeting, not to improve accuracy. Forecast bias, the systematic directional error, is frequently not a model problem. It is a governance problem. It is what happens when honest data gets punished. Correct accountability does one specific thing: it produces honest data, and honest data is the only input that actually closes gaps over time. So, 4 steps. This is the working discipline for every planning review, not a theoretical model. Step 1: measure the total gap, plan versus actual, total volume, and total value. This sounds obvious. It is not universal. Many organizations track plan versus actuals at product level but never aggregate to a total picture. You cannot decompose what you have not first measured clearly. Or you can say you have to do it very cleanly. Step 2: decompose by type. This is the critical step and the one most reviews skip. You have a total variance figure. Now separate it. What portion is structural, what is execution, and what is forecast error? If you cannot decompose it, everything that follows is guesswork. You are assigning accountability without evidence. Step 3: trace to root cause. For each type, find a specific cause. For structural, which constraint? For execution, which node in the supply chain failed? Which SLA was missed? For forecast, which method underperformed? Which signal was missed? Which assumption was wrong? And what information was not passed? And step 4: route to the right owner. Match the gap type to the function that controls the variable that caused it. Planning owns the forecast gap. Everything else goes to the function with the lever to fix it. You cannot fix what you have not diagnosed. You cannot diagnose what you have not measured. The sequence is not optional. So let us now go through same discipline, 3 completely different industries. Pharmaceuticals. 28% gap on a key SKU cluster. 6 consecutive months. A leadership conclusion each cycle, planning failure. A gap audit decomposed the number. 19% was a regulatory approval delay on a new indication. Structurally, entire outside planning's control. 9% was forecast error. For 6 months, that organization spent its planning reviews attacking 9% of the problem. The other 19% compounded untouched. Fast fashion, 34% end of season gap. Gap decomposition showed 22% was a logistics execution failure. The replenishment arrived 8 days after peak demand. The forecast had been right. The execution chain missed the demand window. In velocity sensitive categories, you have to understand 8 days is 22%. Commodity trading, volume variance 4%, value variance 31%. The volume forecast was nearly perfect. Price volatility, which was structural outside planning, drove almost all of the financial gap. 2 problems, 2 entirely different owners. The gap type changes by industry. The decomposition discipline is identical to all. So now let us take a live example. An industrial components company in the energy sector was facing a 22% supply gap on a critical imported SKU. During the planning review, The immediate conclusion was that procurement had failed, and the leadership approved premium freight to expedite all shipments. Before the decision was executed, the planning team decomposed the gap to understand its true causes. The analysis showed that 9% of the gap was genuine forecast error caused by an unexpected customer project. 8% resulted from a supplier changing its production schedule without notice, and 5% was due to an 11-day customs clearance delay. This revealed that only 9% of the total gap could actually be reduced through expedite. The blanket expedite was cancelled and each gap was assigned to the function that owned it. Over the next 6 planning cycles, the supply gap reduced from 22% to 3%, not because forecasting improved dramatically, but because 3 different problems were diagnosed correctly and managed by right owners with right coordination. So we discussed about this in our previous episodes, but I would like to take you through this again. 12 episodes in, 4 remaining in season 1. Look at this stack. Every layer depends on the one below it. We built the diagnostic foundation first because before you can fix a forecasting problem, you need to understand why it is breaking. Method, parameters, accuracy, system behavior, sensing, artificial intelligence, and today we are doing gap analysis. Gap analysis sits at the junction between method and governance. You cannot build governance frameworks without understanding what goes wrong when plans meet reality. That is what this episode gave you today. So, what comes next is the governance layer. Episode 13, the forecast policy matrix, a structured framework for matching forecasting methods to product segments. Episode 14 integrates everything into S&OP. Episode 15 extends to VMI. Episode 16 closes the season with IBP. We are not done after that. There are more seasons to come, as you can go and watch in my introduction to SCM Decoded and what is SCM Decoded exactly going to do. So 3 things from today. A gap without a type is a gap without an owner. The total variance number is not actionable until you decompose it. You have to see if it is structural, execution, forecast, 3 different decisions, 3 different functions, 3 different remedies. The accountability trap destroys forecast quality over time. When planning teams are held responsible for gaps they did not cause, they stop producing honest numbers. The forecast becomes a political document. Closing a gap on the wrong horizon is gap concealment. Buffer inventory gives you one cycle on relief. The root cause produces the same gap next cycle, larger, because the buffer cost has now compounded on top of it. One question to take into your next planning review: when the gap came up, did the meeting identify which type of gap it was before deciding who should fix it? That question will tell you exactly where you are. So next week, the forecasting policy matrix, which model belongs to which product and why most organizations are running the wrong model on the wrong product and cannot see it. So guys, thank you for watching the episode. Subscribe, like and share. Comment on how we can go better on this. I will see you there again. Bye bye.